Welcome back to Restorative Justice and Peace Building. I had promised last week that during this week of your debate, and I do, as I've said, appreciate your busy workload, but this debate is really a culminating event of the course, and I'm hoping to see the best of your knowledge, the deepest possible analysis of the reasons that we still need to consider retributive justice in this world, reasons we need to promote and create more restorative justice, and also how we might blend these two approaches to criminal justice and peace building. Now, first of all, I would like to start with what I introduced last week. We do have a problem when police try to mediate between victims and offenders, and those of you who are police, those of you who work closely with police, know that police mediate every day. At their best, that's what they do. They negotiate and mediate. This is what they rely on much more than drawing their weapons and using their weapons, attempting to intimidate. The worst of policing that we too often see. If you're not involved with law enforcement and you have little contact, you are not going to be aware that the best of police officers are the best of mediators that we see in the world today. But they still have conflicts of interest because they are sworn, as is all of our criminal justice system, all of the prison guards, the probation and parole officers, the judges, they are sworn to uphold the laws of our society, the criminal laws of our society, and to do so in line with the laws of criminal procedure. They are not your typical party or mediator because they are representatives of the state. I hope this doesn't sound too ominous. I actually appreciate what the best of our public servants do on behalf of our states, our nation states. And even though my husband, as a retired colonel, who has his master's in Gandhian and peace studies, is predicting a blurring of nation-state boundaries with our current global internet connectivity, I still appreciate what our nation states do at their best, and upholding and creating laws. Those are two of the important functions. Now, as I'm speaking to you, I hope you don't mind my becoming a little political here, but there is a prospect that we will see some new presidential candidates, specifically Vice President Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren as his running mate. I'm not trying to get political with you today. I want to talk about Elizabeth Warren as an example of a law faculty, a Harvard law faculty, who stepped up to the plate and did something critical in regards to our nation's laws after the whole Occupy Wall Street and finance scandals erupted, our economic bubbles burst and hurt so many people. She is an example of someone that I respect deeply, who said we could have prevented much of this with law. And so I'm giving you an argument for the retributive justice system, or at least a rule of law system. But when police step away from upholding the law, when criminal court judges try to mediate between victims and offenders rather than prioritizing the just prosecution and enforcement of law, we run into some conflict of interests. Many of you know that our courts are overwhelmed with cases in this country. We rely on law so heavily in this very multicultural, diverse country and we have become so busy, so out of touch with each other, so uninterested in mediating with our neighbor at a local mediation center, more interested in connecting with them on the internet, that we are suing more and our courts are overwhelmed. And so one of the conflicts of interest is that there are too many cases in our courts. You know, the California 3 strikes you're out law, very controversial law, and not necessarily an effective law based on the research that's going on, that many offenders after the age of 26 or 28 simply become nicer people, less interested in breaking the law. So to have pay for their prison costs, you know, after the age of 28 or 30, unless they are one of these, people, a sex offender who simply can't rehabilitate, someone involved with a gang who is far from interested in reform. It doesn't make sense to have so many cases in our court and so many prisoners in our jails. Courts are the mediators in these problems, and sometimes they are attempting to mediate between victims and offenders simply so the case does not go to trial. And you already saw the injustice of the Hurricane Carter case. This is not an appropriate use of mediation, victim-offender mediation. Instead, those judges and the other leaders, administrators of our criminal justice system should be asking, what can we do to reduce our caseload so we can prioritize a full and just defense, a full and just case for our most serious, egregious cases? Here's another example of conflict of interest, law enforcement. For years in the United States, police have been mediating between family members, particularly husbands and wives. They say it's just domestic. Why don't you just go home and make up and everything's okay, even when there is the most horrendous of domestic abuse evident in the case? It reflects a long-term, disturbing, entrenched sexism and a belief it's okay to be violent towards women and children, that you would think our society would finally transform and rise above, but it's required an incredible fight, state by state, with independent oversight, nonprofit, and citizen, to ensure that police uphold the law in domestic abuse cases. I imagine the same still happens with sexual assault, rape cases. I really have not been immersing myself in criminal justice for a long time. But I think you're getting my point. Police and criminal justice systems need to keep their priorities clear and focused. And if we are introducing to them that we are trained and able to help them as independent outside mediators, they are not going to be corrupting their system, attempting to blend restorative and retributive in the wrong ways. Now, that said, I would like to talk about some of the risks of promoting mediation alone. And the main one is power imbalance and the risk of injustice. You are not in my ADR class, so I have not had you do research where you can see that still, sadly, there are very few states in this nation where women are getting paid equal pay for equal work. We're considering them for combat at the moment, and I'm not going to express an opinion on this, even though I am from a family of, Norwegian American women who are 6 foot taller. You can guess that I think this should be a discussion. But women too often don't just negotiate fair salaries, but they, along with other groups of less power in our society, and these are generally communities of color, give more than they receive in mediation after mediation. And I rarely see in the research a remorseful offender. The mediation is the #1 top choice of corporations in the world because they can negotiate and resolve behind closed doors without public scrutiny, without public record. And I have yet to see one time that they felt badly that they were able to get away with, excuse me, murder in their mediation with somebody who was less informed, less powerful, more gracious, more giving. If you are arguing for victim-offender mediation, for a restorative approach to crime and violence, war in our societies, you need to be addressing how you're going to ensure that power is balanced so that it's a just, fair process for all concerned. I think I've said enough to stimulate your debate a bit more for this week. I love debating myself. I hope some of you love a good debate too. Have a great week.